child grows up feeling that their needs are not going to get taken care of, you don't create an independence, you create anxiety. And all of this is about balance, isn't it? Like, independence is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just, this is way, way, way out of balance. And I think you said it. You can't get sober and be hyper independent. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
I dreamt that you were twisted through 7 suns.
Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Soberful podcast, and I'm Veronica.
And I'm Chip.
And we hope that you're doing okay. Welcome to today's episode. We are going to talk about, this has been on our list for a while. I've got a couple of announcements, but I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about. We're talking about hyper independence and how that shows up a lot in the therapeutic work we do, and kind of go deep into that. Be interesting to see if you recognize yourself or if you recognize somebody. And, you know, feel free, if you find these episodes interesting, to forward them. A couple of quick asks. If you could give us a quick rating on whatever app you listen to, that would help so much. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and just a quick rating would be great. It helps the show get noticed. So if you've been a fan of the show, not done that, that would be really helpful. Second thing is, I actually have 3 things. Second thing is, the store is finally open. So if you would like to be the proud owner of a great Soberful t-shirt or Soberful mug, or we have tote bags, some really nice sweaters, some baseball hats. If you are ready to be sober out loud, then go along to soberful.com. It will also be on my social media and in the link for the show notes if you want to purchase a Soberful item. And then the last thing is, I have an awesome workshop coming up in July that I'm super excited about with a friend of mine called Kate Bailey from Love Sober. And it's for women. It's called Hot Sobriety. And it's for women in the perimenopause and menopause and affected by their hormones. That's on July 10th. So look out for that. Again, it'll be on my social media and on soberful.com. It's a 3-hour workshop on what the hell is happening with your hormones, how to manage that and be sober and get sober at the same time. So that's my quick announcements. How are you, Chip? You're busy. You've got a lot going on.
A lot going on. I had a very bizarre situation today where I went to a court to appear on behalf of a client. And apparently the prison that he is currently in didn't think he was in the prison. They said he's not here. He's not in custody.
They lost him.
Which is just incredible.
You can't make it up.
You can't make it up, especially as last week they were saying, no, he's refused to come out of his cell. And he was going, they're not letting me out of my cell. And yeah, it's like Kafka. It's been really strange. Yeah, so that's been going on all day. And also, I think my cat is very ill, so that's worrying me as well.
Oh, it's always hard with animals.
I hate it. We've decided we're not going to get another animal after this.
Really?
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much.
I'm gonna. When my dog is about 7, I'm getting another dog. Because the only way I could even bear losing him would be to at least have another furry baby. And I've made my son promise that I'm going to have dogs until the day I die. And then if the dogs outlive me, he's got to come and get them.
Oh, okay. I've got to come and get them.
No, not you.
Oh, okay.
This is when I die, Chip. God, bloody hell. No, my son.
Oh, right.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. I know. Yeah. So hyper independence. So there's a little description here that I want to give. Hyper independence is a stress response. It's a protection mechanism. And these are some of the signs of hyper independence. Inability to open up to others, always trying to prove they are self-sufficient, not accepting help from others, overburdening themselves with work commitments, striving to maintain an air of constant occupation, using avoidance tactics for social events. Interesting, right? I've seen this a lot. And I think, in my experience, the cause of it has always been a lack of proper safe parenting, which has obviously meant that you get children
at a very young age doing things that they, way beyond their age bracket for responsibility, cooking, looking after the house, looking after their parents, and providing the care for themselves that they're not getting provided by their parents. And I see it a lot because, a lot of people with alcohol and drug problems come from what I would call dysfunctional family backgrounds, obviously a lot lacking in sort of proper care and responsibility. So you do get people at a very young age having to look after themselves and doing a pretty good job of it. And that's the problem, is that they do, in the absence of anything else, they do a pretty good job of it, and they survive a situation that would, normally quite often have broken many people. So they come out of it thinking, I am very capable. I can handle all kinds of things because look what I did. I did that, even though there was no support. I did this, this, and this. And the problem is that it is the absolute enemy of recovery, because if there's one thing you can't be, I don't think, in recovery, is hyper independent. You need to be able to talk to people, ask for people for help, admit that you're struggling with things, all those things that are the opposite of hyper independence, you need to do in order to do recovery. And, a lot of people who are hyper independent, I don't need any help. I've got, I've sorted out all kinds of stuff in the past. I can sort this one out. It makes it very difficult to take on advice.
Yeah, it's. I think one of the things in our culture is we overvalue independence.
Yeah,
it's sort of almost idolized, I feel, and that's the thing. Being independent is a good thing. We want our children to eventually. I mean, there's a whole conversation here we could have about children being dependent on their parents a lot longer now, like way into their 20s, all that kind of stuff. I was just having a conversation with someone who's pregnant about, she was talking first child and talking about sleep and letting them cry and all that kind of stuff. And I said, there's some kind of, she heard someone say like, oh, you let them cry, otherwise they'll get too dependent. I said, that's completely false. Absolutely. I said, it's the other way around. When you appropriately respond to an infant's needs and they are secure in knowing that their needs are going to be met, that is the solid base that they then can be independent from. If a child grows up feeling that their needs are not going to get taken care of, that you don't create an independence, you create anxiety. And all of this is about balance, isn't it? Like, independence is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just, this is way, way, way out of balance. And I think you said it, you can't get sober and be hyper independent. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And many of the people who come to see me who have grown up in a situation where they have had to be responsible at an age way too young for that level of responsibility, they find it really difficult to admit, I can't cope, I can't manage. So they often present, I think, later than they would normally do because they've struggled so much to kind of sort it out on their own and obviously not been able to manage it. And I think that means also that rather than catching it early and sort of asking for help at an early age, they put it off because they think they should be able to manage it. So that can make things a little bit more difficult and problematic. But on the whole, I think it means that they find, even when they get to you or get to me or whoever it is, even then, when you're giving them advice, they can often sort of, okay, yeah, I get that. Okay, yeah, right. Okay, yeah, got it. Yeah. And kind of think they've got it fixed really quickly because that's how they've got through life, by sorting things out. And I will always say, this is going to be your worst enemy because you're here sitting in front of me with a drink and drug problem. You need to be able to kind of take on it. I see a real correlation between people developing hyperindependence and, as you quite rightly said, the lack of that being given to them when they were younger. Because otherwise, why would you need to be hyper-independent?
Exactly. You said something that I really liked there about it was a lack of safe parenting.
Yeah.
That was really, there's a lot of unsafe parenting.
Yep.
And what is usually mixed up in that is trauma. It's also a
Yep.
trauma. They stay in a kind of state of hypervigilance
Yep.
as well, because when you grow up with chaos and trauma, you just have no idea where the next thing's coming from, and you've got to be prepared.
The thing is that this kind of lack of boundary parenting doesn't have to be an abusive, chaotic, really dysfunctional. It could be, on the surface, quite a functioning household, and yet both parents are kind of off on some sort of, very kind of independent thing they're doing. They're, but they're not providing. They're there, but they're not providing safe, supportive structure for the children. They're not beating them, but they're just very wrapped up in their own thing or whatever they're doing, and they're just not providing the sort of structure that we need. And I mean, I see parents resisting nowadays. I think the pendulum has swung, it swings all the time over the years and ages, but I think it's swung too much now to a point whereby that kind of independence is considered. Look how independent he is. Look at him making decisions about what he wants to eat at 2 years old. Isn't this great? No, it's not great. It's that child has been put in a position that they shouldn't be put in. They've been asked to make choices that they shouldn't be made. They're asking 3-year-olds, what time would you like to go to bed? And that's not safety. That is often perceived nowadays to be kind of, oh, that's really good parenting, letting them have choice. No, at a young age, it's not good parenting. It's actually makes a child feel incredibly unsafe. It's not, I'm in control of my life. I don't even know what's going on. And I'm 4 years old, and I've got to choose my food. I've got to choose my bedtime. I've got to choose what I wear. What would you like to wear today? There's an age for that, but there's also an age to provide safe structure, decision making, and let the child just sort of learn the things that they have to learn without having to cook their own meals or whatever it is that they have to do. And and it can often get certainly I see a lot of businessmen, and I suppose to a certain extent business women, who are very driven, very independent. They're the kind of hard, make the hard decision, drive, but actually get them to talk about what's going on. I play golf with an incredibly wealthy individual who has brought himself up from nothing to be a multi-millionaire, and he's got that kind of independent drive. But ask him to talk about a feeling or an emotion, or it's just absolutely flummoxed. He doesn't know what to do, because he's just been, everything has been about, I've got to do this. So it can be a very unattractive trait being around somebody, because it manifests itself as a grown-up in, I'll choose where we eat. I'll choose when we eat. It's a very difficult person to be in a partnership with, I would think. I would think they would struggle with intimacy. Well, I know they do. Yeah.
This was me to some extent. I was just talking to a couple of clients about this week. I was about 10 or 11 when I had this realization that neither of my parents knew what they were doing. I had this realization about, my mum was a single parent. My dad was very absent. And I just had this kind of knowing that my mum really didn't have a clue about life. And it did make me feel very unsafe. And that is a feeling that stayed with me until I got sober, was a feeling of not being safe. And it was a feeling of always being on quicksand. When you're a child and the adult who's meant to be in charge doesn't know what they're doing, it's very, very scary. And I left home at 16. And I think about this, I just think it's crazy. I was shopping for groceries to feed myself at 16. I was paying rent at 16. I was responsible. All my friends in England, you get a driver's license at 17. And I never had a driver's license until I was into my 20s, actually, until I was sober. Actually, it was my late 20s. Like, that was beyond, at 17, I couldn't do that on my own. I didn't have anyone to help me. And I always had friends, but the biggest thing for me was asking for help and being vulnerable. Yeah. I would rather die. I went into drug-induced psychosis at 18. Inside, there was one thing going on. On the outside, I was pretending everything was fine. There was no way I could ever tell anyone that. And eventually, after months and months and months, I went to the doctor and sort of mumbled it a bit, but, in like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
The asking for help, the feeling of needing other people. It's the vulnerability bit. I can remember just feeling in my sobriety, I kind of had that realization. And for me, the big thing was my first sponsor is I had to tell her about my panic attacks because I couldn't sit in meetings.
Right.
It just sort of all came to this like dead end of you've got to tell somebody because you cannot go on like this. There's nowhere else to go. The fear of it, I remember it was a big hurdle to climb in sobriety, I think.
Yeah. And as you were talking then, I was just thinking that hyperindependence often implies that somebody is very capable of kind of getting through life and manage things. I was actually thinking of myself because I also went straight from school to London. I didn't bother to do not pass home, just go straight to London. I was able for the whole of my 20 years of my addiction to get through life. I somehow managed to, in an incredibly dysfunctional way.
Yeah.
Very chaotic, very socially unacceptable way, very irresponsible way. But I was able to, I always had a roof over my head, albeit it might be a broken down building somewhere, a half derelict building. I would somehow get food. I could get the drugs, but at an unbelievably dysfunctional level of kind of chaos level, but independent. I didn't, have parents bailing me out or anything. I did everything independently, but incredibly chaotically. So I think there is a sort of slight, in people's minds, hyper-independence being, very successful and very capable. But I think it can also be at a very dysfunctional, chaotic level. So and I'm using myself as an example there. I got by, I hustled and bustled, but it was impossible for me to ask for help. Absolutely impossible. And
I think that's the defining characteristic, don't you?
Yeah.
The not being able to ask for help.
Yeah. And I mean, thank God somebody came to my house and said, you need help, because I've got to somehow find a way of working this out. I've got to find this out. So initially, all the kind of things that we teach ourselves and others about how to get better, which is, acknowledge you've got a problem, find places where you can get support and help and go to those places regularly, or you speak to those people regularly. Well, if you're hyper independent, you're not going to do that. You're not going to want to do that. You're not, as you said, you're not going to want to admit, I can't manage this, which is bad enough, hard enough for just sort of normally chaotic people to admit they can't, that they've got themselves into problems with alcohol or drugs. It's really difficult but for somebody who's hyper independent, having to say, I'm failing here, I can't cope. It's a very difficult thing. And then, as I said, I think I'm probably going to repeat myself, but then when they do eventually get to the point where they have to go somewhere and ask for help, and you say, okay, this is what you do, they'll make it, well, I'll do it my way. I get what you say, but I'll do it my way. You said that, I should go to this support group or whatever, but I'll do it my way. I'll do it my way.
What they'll do is, this is classic. They'll go, right. I got to go to support groups or meetings or whatever. I got that. But what you'll find out is they're going to different ones each time and sitting at the back. So like, I've been to about 8 different meetings since you saw me. But what they've actually done is they've gone to different ones, so nobody knows them. There's no chance to build connection or relationship or interact. But they can say that they're telling themselves they've done it. But they're still doing it in a way that keeps everybody out.
Yes. I mean, if we're talking about sort of self-help groups, it's really easy to turn up just before the meeting starts, sit at the back, say nothing, not take anything in, leave at the meeting. You've been to, they said go to a meeting.
Yeah,
I've been to a meeting. And I guess the same thing can happen in the Soberful support group. You can turn up, just watch and disappear, or you can kind of, but I mean, I see this a lot, I think, because I do think, I think we've often said this in the podcast that, there is certainly a kind of unifying factor about people who become dependent, and that is dysfunction in early life in one form or another, whether it's parents who are drinking, whatever. But there's some early childhood dysfunction, and therefore this tendency towards sorting things out on our own, hyperindependence, it's a very common feature. Also, as you said at the start, when you listed those kind of symptoms, I don't have to reveal how I feel emotionally. It's a really, I am capable. I can do anything. I can fix anything. I can never have to admit that I don't know how to do something. I can do everything. But also the one thing I don't ever have to do is tell you how I feel, because I'm so busy doing things. I'm so busy being capable. I've got 4 jobs going, and I'm so busy kind of looking after all that. Look how capable I am. I'm but absolutely incapable of saying, actually, I'm feeling, when you say to them, okay, that's great, thanks. How are you feeling about the fact that, I don't know, your mum's just died or something? Well, then you're suddenly breaking through that barrier, because it's like that hyper-independence builds a kind of imaginary barrier around you, people, that says, no, don't come near me. I'm too busy to stop, can't stop. Yeah, I think there's a kind of thing called high functioning anxiety disorder, which is very similar to hyperindependence. It's like, I'm very capable, and it does make accessing the emotional side of things. And we all know that that's the bit we need to access. We all know that actually, although it feels very difficult, giving up the substance, alcohol or whatever it is, feels very difficult at the beginning, but actually it's the easiest part of the process in a way. And once you've done that, you're left with having to work out who you are. We all think that the most difficult bit is going to be giving up this drink that we take every day. That's going to be a nightmare, giving that up. But actually, with a bit of medication and support, it's quite easily dealt with. And we can quite easily get, and I'm not trying to minimize the struggle that it is to get sober, but we can quite easily get sober. And lots of people have got, histories when they've got 3 or 4 weeks sobriety, or 2 months or 3 months, or in the course of their drinking, they've got these little periods of sobriety, because the problem they get to is, yes, I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've been very capable. I've been shown how strong I am. I've got rid of the alcohol. But then they're left with the problem of having to disclose the problems they have, who they are, how do you feel about interacting with people? Are you as socially strong as you said you were, or are you quite shy? And I think it's very difficult for people who are hyper independent to have to admit that.
The other thing is, they always have this air of like busyness and purpose, and like they give off that vibration of, don't bother me, I'm about to do something very important. And I want to say, one of the things that in the last 10 to 15 years has aided this is the phone, because they're the people who always look like they're making a very urgent business decision, or something very urgent is happening with someone that they must deal with at this moment, right? So their phone is often used as a kind of shield of that, yes, I want to interact, but there's something very important I must attend to at this very second, when they're just on freaking Twitter or something.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing, so what comes hand in hand with hyperindependence when you're like this, and this was true for me, again, it's to do, everything's connected. It's the vulnerability, not asking for help, is how lonely you are. I was so lonely. And I see that in a lot of my clients, is that all this behavior, it's a steel wall that you're putting up around you, because you're the only person you can count on for your safety and to get things done. You can't trust, you might be let down, you might be hurt, you need to protect. So it's a steel wall. And I find people who really have this trait are also very, 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 very lonely.
Yeah.
And that's just a killer. I mean, it's just awful.
Well, it's a killer for intimate relationships as well, because it's like I'm it's me. I've got my life, and then you've got somebody you've got to share it with. You've got to sort of spend time on somebody else, or allow somebody else a bit of time, or give somebody else some. It's the very opposite of having an intimate relationship, because you are so busy and so preoccupied and so on your mission, because an intimate relationship almost requires you to be able to say, I'm struggling today a bit. You don't. I hope that in my relationship with Heidi, we can both admit, well, no, this is going to be a tough day today. I'm feeling vulnerable today, and I don't have to kind of go, no, got it. I'm under control. Never mind. Don't worry. And allow myself, or both of us, to allow ourselves to be, I suppose, what would be described by a hyper-independent as weak. As over emotional and weak, has worked his way up from nothing to become very, very wealthy man. Absolutely. I've had conversations. I mean, I don't necessarily always tell people that I work with addiction, but somehow often the conversation, somebody famous might have died of an overdose or something.
Yeah.
And well, they should have just pulled themselves together, shouldn't they? It's like, really? That's what it's all down to. You just in every situation you just pull yourself together. Is that really? Is that how and so they don't allow themselves to grieve over sad things. They don't allow themselves. It's not just about asking for help. It's about doing anything that looks like, in their view, it might be weak. Classic sort of English so-called stoicism, where just pull yourself together. My family were like that. Just pull yourself together. Well, your grandmother's died. Well, never mind. Everybody's going to die. Never mind. Move on. There's no room for any kind of emotion is seen as a weakness. Emotion is seen as a weakness. Failure is seen as a weakness. So obviously, having failed to cope with addiction or alcoholism, you're coming into the thing feeling I'm a complete failure. I'm so weak and a failure. That's a bad starting point. You're a long way behind the start line, right at the beginning of the kind of journey, because you've just got to, allowing yourself to even be like other people. I don't want, oh yeah, I feel that way. No, you don't feel like it like I do. I can see that there are times when I've demonstrated that trait but I do see it a great deal in clients from like I was, from dysfunctional backgrounds. And as I said, to me, it's the enemy of recovery. It's the absolute opposite of asking for help.
Yeah, and it is, it's these early childhood experiences that really shape us and teach us about the world. And we take those teachings and think that that's how the world is. And it's very, very ingrained in us. I think just everyone gets to this jumping off point like I did. You can try and avoid it. You can try and circumnavigate it. You can try all of these different things for it not to be the case. Yeah. But eventually it is about, I think the first thing is about asking for help. And, I think often, to be honest, I think my work as a psychotherapist, that's sometimes with people who are, have this trait, that's maybe their first port of call, is the first, like they can just about go to a professional, just about. Like they can't open up to a friend or anyone else, just about a professional, because it's contained. There's the agreement of confidentiality. Oh. I definitely can recall many clients who told me things, really quite traumatic, awful things that they'd never told anyone else, and were probably never going to tell anyone else. And the first time they'd ever spoken to it was with me in that relationship. I'm sure you've had the same. And,
absolutely.
And I think for some people that has to be the first step. And so be it, because that's often appropriate, because the right professional is the person who can create safety and, all of that kind of things. I remember a young girl, she sticks in my mind now we're talking about this, a young girl I worked with, she was in her late 20s. I sometimes find they can be quite overachievers on the surface. Like she'd done really well professionally. Her personal life was a mess. And she had a sister with really severe mental health problems that had sucked all of the oxygen out of the family. Like she'd just been left to her own devices. Her sister was suicidal, all kinds of really, and trauma. It was lots of trauma. So she'd just been left to get on with it since she was about 8. She'd got her first sort of serious boyfriend that she really did like, but he was like, she couldn't open up to him. So the relationship was crumbling. Anyway, I remember her telling me her whole story, and it was just trauma after awfulness, after abandonment, after, and she kind of told it quite matter of fact. And I said, quite frankly, I want to take you home and put you in my guest bedroom and tuck you up and get you some hot cocoa and just look after you. And she just broke. She just like, it cracked her open.
Yeah.
And I said, I just feel like I just want to, like, no one's ever taken care of you. And that just did it. And we got somewhere with that work. And that's kind of, you know, she's just been in this state of coping and getting on with it. It never occurred to her that somebody could care for her.
They don't know how to receive care. They don't know how to receive affection.
Yes.
You know, it's like, haven't got a clue. If somebody puts their arm around, it's like, what are you doing? What you doing? Get off. Because they've got no idea how to cope with affection and and physical give me a hug
or empathy. Just empathy. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah
Nobody's ever done it, so they've got no training. And this is what, you know, when you're upset, somebody gives you a cuddle, or I mean, that's a simplification, but you know, well, I've got no experience of that. Nobody taught me how to do that. Nobody trained me. That nobody said, look, if you hurt yourself, you know, you can get a cuddle and a hug and you can be made to feel safe. No, the message was probably, well, it was being ignored. You just get up and you've got to look it after it yourself. And, you know, you and I, I'm sure, have both endless stories of people way too young having to do things. I mean, I can remember my daughter, you know, having to call the ambulance. I think she was about 7, you know, and that's not appropriate for somebody to have to do that. And I do think there's a slight tendency that in society at the moment, we do think that teaching children to be hyper independent is a good thing at too young an age. And as we've said earlier on, it doesn't make a child feel safe having to make quite important life decisions at an inappropriate age. The happiest children I see are the ones where there are caring and loving boundaries, where there are, you know, they can feel safe. They know what's going to happen. They know time it's going to happen. And there's some safety in those boundaries. And I think they're the happiest children. The ones who are just left, do what you like. Yeah, do what you like. Come in when you like. Go to bed when you want. Yeah, you know, they're the ones that are most at risk.
Just a note on that again, this is about balance. It's out of balance, and it's all about child-led. Everything is child-led. And again, in balance, that's fine. You know, the child wants to do colouring and not Legos or whatever. You know, all of that is fine. But absolutely, too much is out of balance, this child being child-led, in my opinion. And I will die on this hill. Children thrive with firm, loving boundaries, which is they're guardrails. They're just guardrails. To like, and within that, they can become their authentic self. They can become their authentic self within kind, loving guardrails. And that's a whole other subject.
Because
going back to what you were...
Well, I was going to say, you know, probably forgotten now, but I was going to say, you know, without that kind of safety, they haven't got time to kind of, as you say, develop and find their true authentic self, because they're too busy having to find out how they're going to feed themselves, or how they're going to, you know, because, you know, I've got to cook my own meal, or I've got to, you know, they...
Yeah, going back to what you're saying, that I've always seen that people who are hyper independent, is this receiving empathy is almost like a slap in the face for them. It's so shocking. And it's very, very, very hard for them. And it's, you know, it's just someone saying, God, that sounds really hard. You know, can I help with that? Or, oh, that just shocking for them. And so, I mean, let's just, before we end, let's talk a little bit, you know, I think we don't want to be hyper independent. Everyone wants to be independent. It just needs to be in balance.
Absolutely.
And to get sober, you can't do it on your own. You need other people. You can't do life on your own. We have to, we need other people, and asking for help. So I think the first step is identifying somebody that they believe could be a safe person to ask for help from, right? And, and a lot of cases that would be a trained professional, not always maybe, but, perhaps there is a friend or a relative who's always sort of been there consistently. Maybe there's in a recovery group, they've identified someone who just seems very consistent. Maybe that's where they go and ask for help from. But I think that is the first step, is asking for help, and knowing that there's going to be some uncomfortable feelings, because the process is we've got to dismantle the steel wall, right? Yeah. We've got to dismantle the steel wall, and because it's not serving them. And would you add anything to that?
Well, I would, I mean, I think if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I wonder if I'm hyper independent, listen to yourself. When somebody says, oh, hi Chip, how are you doing? Check how you respond. And does your response actually match with how you're feeling? Because hyper independent people are not gloriously happy all the time. Probably the exact opposite, actually. So I think check yourself. When somebody says, oh, hi, how are you doing? What's going on? Obviously, the British thing to say, oh, fine, absolutely. How's the weather? That's very, but I mean, just check yourself. Do you ever say, I'm not so good at the moment? Because if you were to say to me now, how am I feeling? I'm feeling really nervous. I think there's something wrong with my cat, which is making me very anxious, because I can feel my sort of, I know that I'm going to get really sad when he dies, and I've got a feeling I can. So if somebody was to say to me today, how are you feeling? I'd say, well, I'm not great, actually. I'm really worried about my cat. That's not a great admission of weakness, but I think it's a good way of checking how high your level of hyperindependence is. When somebody asks you how you're doing, what is your response? Maybe just make some little inroads into responding a little bit more authentically, because obviously hyperindependent people don't always answer authentically. Yeah. They give you the I'm a coper answer. So, I think that would be a good little test to see how you get on when people ask you how you're doing.
I think so. That's good. So hopefully this has given you some food for thought. I'm sure that everybody's recognizing someone, whether it's themselves or whether it's someone they know. You can now spot the traits and know that person is struggling and lonely. And I think I would say they will have a steel wall up. So don't, just be sort of gentle with them. But consistency is good. Just a consistent, little pat on the arm, like, how are you? Good to see you. Just a little consistent that you see them and you care about them. And, maybe one day they'll have a breakthrough. So it's coming up to our summer break. So we have a 2-month summer break over the summer, July and August. We don't record any more shows. Ooh. We go and recharge our batteries. So just let you guys know we're coming up to that. We'll have
I don't need my batteries recharging. I'm independent.
We have a few more episodes and then we'll be on our summer break, and we will be back as normal in September. And let us know what you think about this episode when you see it go out on social media. We'd love to know your experience is with being, hyper independent, and all of your thoughts on that. And we will be back next week. Thanks so much, Chip.
Okay, bye-bye.